recording this episode of the Resilience Report in May 2025. And to say that the sustainability landscape has been dynamic over the past 5 months is a little bit of an understatement. It's really an interesting time because in certain markets, it is extremely fragmented. And then in other markets, we're seeing them moving ahead with sustainability progress and commitments. Even when we look at different industries, we're seeing a big contrast from those, for example, banks who are pulling out of sustainability alliances to the data center space, where we have never seen this kind of commitment to emissions and water and energy reduction and conservation. So it should come as no surprise that the marketing and communication space has not been spared from all of these different changes. Last year, I did an entire episode on greenwashing and greenhushing. So if you want to dive in deep into those specific topics, you can definitely pop back. However, today we're going to be looking at some of the top trends for business professionals to keep in mind as you're building out your sustainability messaging and campaigns for your respective businesses. These have all come through different conversations with their previous guests. So you might have heard some of these snippets or from deeper research or my own personal experience as we're working through and starting to look at the back half of 2025. From this evolving landscape and top trends, there are certainly some key themes, and probably the number one reason why I get contacted is, do I feel like the way we talk about sustainability has changed? We're definitely seeing a little bit of scaling back of certain terminology, leaning into others. We're also seeing that we need to really kind of back it when we're talking about our different sustainability claims. And then there's also some general trends, I would say, that as a marketing professional, I'm seeing across the board, but then they certainly also apply to those speaking about different sustainability initiatives. My hope is that with this episode, if you are the person at your company trying to craft your sustainability strategy, you're trying to report it out, you're trying to engage different stakeholders, that you'll just feel a little bit comfortable or a little bit less alone, because I'm sure that there's going to be some of these different trends that I'll talk about that you'll realize that you've actually been seeing them. And it's an opportunity for you to lean into those trends as well, so that you are kind of matching the state of the market as you build your progress. So what trends have we been seeing? The first are certainly, as I mentioned, more about the way we talk about sustainability. So the first is the decline of the term ESG when talking about your sustainability initiatives. If you're deep in this space, this is coming as no surprise. You have probably seen scaling back, possibly at your own company, perhaps in your own industry. But this is definitely something I think that anecdotally we've all been aware of, but recent statistics really hammer home this fact. If we only look at annual reports, so those sustainability report at the end of the year for companies, what we're seeing is that in 2025, only 6% of the S&P 100 are mentioning the term ESG. This is down from around 25% last year and 40% in 2023. So does this mean that sustainability mentions are going away altogether? Absolutely not. It is really the term itself. I think because it became so polarizing that many different businesses are stepping away from the term and are instead leaning towards some terms that feel a little bit less politically charged, such as sustainability or risk avoidance. And as we lean into these terms like impact, for example, I do want to reassure our listeners that in speaking to sustainability professionals at all of these different companies, there seems, for the most part, to be a consensus that while companies are maybe getting a little bit less outward facing about their different commitments, that nothing has changed internally. In fact, many of my contacts are reporting that they are seeing that their companies are simply moving ahead with their different initiatives. They're just changing the way they're talking about it. And that's going to play into a couple of the next different trends that we're going to report in a couple of seconds. So the next big trend in how we talk about sustainability is that we are now focused more on the business value and less the moral values. So what I mean by this is that before, you've probably seen this in your own respective industries, is that companies were positioning things with regards to sustainability as that they're doing good things out of the kindness of their heart. However, this is really being challenged right now, I would say, especially for those who are facing investors or who are in a B2B space. What we're really looking for now is for companies to be able to talk about why doing the right thing actually makes good business sense. So this translates more specifically to companies talking about sustainability in a way that directly links back to their strategies and their business models. Long story short, essentially what this is doing is just reducing the gap between what companies are saying and what they're doing and really bringing those two worlds together. In other words, as a business leader, think about this as you need to build the business case for sustainability. Trust me, I know that the bigger business case is certainly there, but really think about how you can most closely align it to your different strategy pieces and initiatives within your business so that it doesn't feel like it's just kind of floating on the side. The next trend we've been seeing is that of transparency and authenticity. So, again, this kind of goes back to removing some of the fluff when you're talking about your different initiatives and really getting concrete as to what type of actions you are taking. So instead of these broad strokes, we're going net zero. Companies are being asked to show what they're doing. So to really track their progress towards their respective industries and year over year to show this progress. Many companies are also turning to third-party validation of their different claims. For example, if you are making products and you have environmental claims about the product, there are third-party bodies now who can do this for you to add that credibility to your pieces. So this is for the transparency, but then the authenticity part. And for my fellow recovering perfectionists, this is probably one that's going to be a little bit harder for you. But what a lot of companies are now turning to is actually sharing their sustainability journey, not only when things are going well, but also when they're facing challenges. So, for example, in the tech space, we've seen some big names like Microsoft come out and say, we had these aggressive objectives in terms of reducing our carbon emissions. However, with what could have been completely unpredicted skyrocketing interest in generative AI, that they're not able to offset it as quickly. So they're being really transparent and open about the challenges that they're facing and are being open about what types of solutions they're also trying to find in parallel. So really balancing this transparency in terms of your numbers and your progress, but also that authenticity or maybe even vulnerability as to where you are facing challenges along that journey. Now, for this authenticity piece, certainly this is being driven by the end customers, but also from a lot of regulations around the world, most notably the CSRD in Europe, where this risk calculation and reporting and transparency and validation is really getting put into place in Europe. So that this is sort of guiding some of those larger players, which typically set the tone for the rest of organizations behind them. The next piece is really around internal alignment and employee advocacy. Certainly, this is nothing new at any company. If you have a mission or vision, you're going to want to make sure that your associates are really bought into this vision. But I really don't think that there's ever been a time, certainly when it's feeling a little volatile in terms of the sustainability landscape, to really lean into the grassroots initiatives of your associates, but then also to allow them to be the ones who are sharing their stories. So if they're doing an incredible volunteer program locally, or if they've managed to reduce waste in their department, create that safe space for them to be able to share it internally. And then also you can work with your marketing teams to be able to share some of those clear and transparent stories as to their own successes on their own platforms. And if you're thinking of building employer branding, it's been really interesting to see that even while there's a little bit of this political backlash in terms of ESG and sustainability, that for the most part, what we're seeing from studies is that employees are still looking for companies that align with their values when they're going out onto the job market. And then it certainly helps for retention as well. So working with your employees to be able to tell that story on their own terms has that much more value as well. Now, there are a couple of additional trends, as I mentioned at the top, that are more trends that we're seeing in the marketing communication space. But we all know how you tell your story is so important. So it's a good idea to lean into these trends as well. The first is this movement towards visual storytelling and leading into multimedia platforms. So gone are the days where everyone wants to read a really long corporate report or even a really long blog post as to what you're doing at your company, people really like that quick, digestible content. So think about that when you're building out your long sustainability report. How can you break it into these bite-sized morsels that are far more digestible? And at the same time, it allows you this opportunity to have rich content that you can then build in place throughout the entire year. So if you're doing your own marketing and you're a lean team, think about it that instead of having one document you can promote, you have all of these different stories within it that you can piece throughout the year to kind of tell that broader story. That multimedia, certainly from a video piece, we're seeing that this is continuing to dominate, certainly those short form videos. Thank you, TikTok. That we are seeing that people just want this 1 minute or less content to really be able to quickly understand what a company is doing in terms of their different initiatives. This can be translated on the opposite end. We had a conversation on the resilience report where we were talking about this, that it's interesting because there's this kind of dichotomy at the moment where we love this short form content, but then we also love these 3 hour long podcasts. So maybe if you do have a longer story, think about, could that be the right platform? But certainly meeting your audience where they are to make this really engaging, interesting content for a serious topic, but that you want people to feel connected to. The next marketing communications trend that we're seeing everywhere is that gone are the days of generic content, and we are really looking at this personalized approach to messaging. So if you're leaning into your marketing, what this could look like in terms of telling your sustainability story is perhaps leaning into stories that speak to a specific local market. So if you want to talk about success stories with your clients in terms of saving energy, and you're going to want to make sure that you are providing that content, for example, in your local backyard, for example, if that's Europe. But then if you also have clients in North America, you might want to then have an alternative video where you tell a local story, or it tells it in terms of a vertical that's important to them. So making sure that you have these different kind of customizations available, and then leaning into marketing tools where you can segment your audience based on these different segmentation opportunities so that it really feels catered to that end user. This, of course, can feel like a lot of work. Again, I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to this show. So one thing that you can certainly do, and that a lot of companies are starting to do, is lean into AI wherever you can in terms of building out some of that content. If you just want to have that kind of first pass at your content to see what kind of story you can tell, there is certainly that as an opportunity to help you to scale. I would caution this. Obviously, there is the environmental impact of AI overall. However, I would also say that purely if you remove the environmental component, we are starting to see a backlash already in terms of the end consumer starting to pick up on AI content when they feel like it's a little bit too generic. So I would just really make sure that you are keeping this in mind, that reports are now starting to show reduced engagement when marketing teams are leaning 100% on AI for visuals and written content. Make sure at the end of the day, you always have that human eye vetting your content and that you bring it back to that human connection. So these two buckets of trends are certainly what I'm seeing again in speaking with our different guests and different experts in the space. In my own research, we're having that piece of how we talk about sustainability, but then also kind of just how do we weave in the general marketing communications trends as well as we're thinking about telling our respective sustainability story. I would certainly reinforce the fact that while this feels a little bit dynamic again, of a landscape right now, I really encourage you to not be discouraged. We are continuing to see progress, certainly from the larger players that are being impacted by strong state level or international regulations. We're continuing to see that progress. And what's really changing, however, is just the way we talk about things and the way we communicate it. So making sure we're really clear, bringing it back and tying it to the link to your business itself, leaning on your employees where you can, and just constantly trying to keep up with best practices to best tell your story and how we can all do business better.